Hi, Michael.
Hi Vicky, how are you?
I'm good. Uh,
Um, it's been a long time.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do this for us.
I mean, thank you for managing my like I don't know what day it is.
Let me, let me, uh, I'm gonna turn on and I'm gonna promote it one more time on social media so that people remember to sign in. Yeah. How is it going in New York?
Um, it's okay. Um, it um I mean, it's going badly in the United States as a whole. But New York seems to be it's not the cases haven't been getting worse
Mm.
significantly here. Like they've ticked up a little bit, but I think it's going to get bad. So
Mm. Wow. Does it affect your professional practice in terms of the the project that you have been doing or getting more new project?
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, construction was halted for several months, um, so that that definitely impacted things, and we had some things go away
Mm.
because of you know like we were going to I don't know we had some projects that disappeared because of it. But it's also, I don't know, it's like I've been really lucky. Like we've been, we've been okay. Like we have new work. Like we're busy, we have plenty of work or whatever. I mean, I'm obviously in my apartment, like, and like that's where I am. So
Yeah.
you are you using you're in your office, like you guys are kind of.
At the moment, we are. I am still in my office. We have a couple of people that are still working right now. So we actually Hong Kong has been quite lucky. We
Yeah,
had never had a real like shutdown or lockdown. So the only lockdown we had was more like 2 to 3 days, and everyone almost kind of went back to work immediately after.
yeah.
And so in some way the economy took a big hit, including the Hong Kong chapter was also seeing some effects of it. Members were and corporate member are both having hard time, and we also had hard time to organize new events. So it's very difficult to get sponsors when you don't have a lot of physical gathering.
Right.
But professionally speaking, Hong Kong and as a city seems to be doing quite well now relatively to the rest of the world. And so we were lucky in that sense that we can get back to the office and continue to produce like drawings. And mostly right now, a lot of our work for our members are actually coming from China. All of them are American firms, but they were actually working mostly on project like we have a lot of big corporate firm like KPF, SOM, are still
Yeah.
getting a lot of work out of China. So they benefit from it as a whole, and and for us as a small firm, many of this I do mostly and I only do like nonprofit project right now. So it has been quite difficult because when a nonprofit organization they depends on funding, when the big corporate sponsors are not willing to give you as much money, then it also affected the way they planned out their work. So some of the school that we built was actually only half like finished, like they opened already, but some of the interior they left like 2 or 3 rooms like fully unfurnished because they just don't have any more money at this point to like do like play equipment or teaching like equipment or things like that. They just left an empty room until things get better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that it's like the the nonprofit sector or the cultural sector, right? Like there's a lot of, I mean, not even talking about like hospitality or anything like that. Like, I mean, most of our work is like institutional or residential, and you know, like um so we've been sort of okay, but you
Mm,
know, our friends who work on restaurants and hotels are like everything's, you know, everything kind of came to a grinding halt and it hasn't really picked up so much like yet. So I
mm.
don't know. It's
Wow.
tricky. How big is the Hong Kong chapter typically?
We have a full-time member. We have about 300 members right now, including other like corporate members and other individual members. We are about like a little bit more than 400 right now. The full members are mostly working, or actually 1/3 of them works for big firms like SOM,
Yeah.
KPF, and Moser. 1/3 of them are like myself, small firms owners, and then 1/3 of them are like design professionals working for in the academic world. Yeah, so it has been quite diverse for us. Relatively speaking, Hong Kong as a chapter is one of the biggest chapters outside of the United States because I mean, like geographically, we are not the biggest, but because we are so congested in a city, so we have actually more.
Relatively high population situation.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest chapter overseas, we're actually like the Middle East. There's a chapter called the Middle East, but you can imagine it's spanned across like 6 different countries. So they weren't actually, they weren't, I mean, they're more like a continent than an
Totally.
actual chapter. Yeah. But other than that, Hong Kong is collaborating a lot with like San Francisco chapters, New York chapters, and so we had the Top Williams and Billy Chen actually gave us a lectures not long ago, and other people from Vermont was also like working with us, and on the theme of the citizens architect, some of the video that we produced were actually very influential in the state. Some of the students saw some of the work that we've been doing and asking our chapters about planning in Delaware, like urban planning. They wanted to learn more about urban planning after they saw some of the video that we put together. So that's why I thought the webinar that we have with you would be an interesting continuation to the work we have today. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
The,
great.
we shifted the webinar one day earlier, so I think we don't have a lot of attendees at the moment. I think it made some people may have let me.
Will the video be posted somewhere?
Yes, we will actually posted it on YouTube. So give ourselves like maybe 5 more minutes. And so for people who are actually here today, I'm gonna allow them to talk so that you can actually mingle with them a bit more before we get started. Maybe we give ourselves like 5 more minutes and then we can get started. We will be recording this video. We will show you the recording first. If you're okay with the version, we can post it.
Don't show it to me. It's like nothing worse than seeing yourself on camera.
We will be putting it onto YouTube because we actually seeing YouTube as a platform to reach to a demographics that are actually beyond architecture. They may not be an AIA member or not even architects, but the things that we are promoting are actually very important, not only to them, but also as for us as the professional, that we are actually, helping people. We're not just working for the big donor or big developers. So I think we're sending out a very strong message about what architects stand for. And as an AIA, I think we have a very strong message like this year as a whole, promoting diversity, promoting like inclusive design. So I hope I saw all the work that from design advocates. So I think it goes along to
the numbers, regardless of what was actually happening on the ground, and here he is in his own words.
Hey Peter, I happen to actually unmuted you, so feel free to pitch in.
Yeah, no, sorry, I had my TV muted, and I just unmuted it. Yeah, no, whatever, everything Vicky says.
So let me introduce Michael to Peter. Peter is our former president from AIA in Hong Kong. He actually does a lot of volunteering work, not only for the chapters, but also locally for a lot of communities. So he is truly a citizen's architect. Yeah.
Yeah, not as much as Vicky. Vicky is the star of the show, I can tell you.
Yeah, I've known Vicky since he was a student, and he was always the star of the show.
Oh, you guys are old friends.
Yeah, it has been. Yeah, he was my professor. So I not directly under you, but I guess you were in my critique many times when I was still
Yeah.
a student at Pratt. Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's good. That's good.
Mhm.
Well, I think we're all looking forward to this talk. Is there aren't there many people on, Vicky?
Not too many yet. We in the last minute
Thank you.
we kind of shifted the, the
I
time.
know.
So I think some people got confused. I'm trying to
Yeah,
mobilize people to come in right now.
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's see what happens.
Yeah, we'll give ourselves 5 more minutes. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's
yeah.
all a talk on a screen, so if it's posted somewhere,
Yeah. No, we actually have more luck on virtually for whatever reason because people are, especially with the well, we are reaching different demographics. Like for a big name director from a really big firm, they don't have a lot of time. So sometimes like doing it webinar, like they could just like kind of doing their own work and then like turn this on while they're watching it and then do their own work. So sometimes it works out for them. Yeah, so we are if we actually do physical event, it's almost impossible to get a director from AECOM to show up.
Yeah, I mean, I've started there. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like, like I can't be anywhere at 6 p.m. ever. Like, it's not possible. So, but yeah, I've been before COVID. I was going to a lot of like breakfasts with people. Just because it's like you can do something at 8:30 in the morning. That's fine. But at 6:30, forget it. It's not. No, everyone's still in their office. Kind of.
Wow. Yeah. So are you? So you work a lot with AIA New York, right?
Now, yeah, we've got. I mean, I'll show something very brief. That's a collaboration with AI in New York, and we actually just the New York chapter they have a gala every year that used to be called the Heritage Ball, and this year has been sort of rebranded. But yeah, Design Advocates was one of the honorees this year. Design Advocates and NOMA are the honorees this year.
Wow.
It was really kind of that was just last week. So yeah, it's been really the New York chapter has been enormously supportive. We've got a couple of other collaborative sort of projects going on with them. And most of the people who are involved in Design Advocates are part of the New York chapter. So
Wow. That the New York chapter is it's very amazing in some way because they have a lot of resources comparatively. So I think they're doing a lot of impact that many other chapters are not doing yet. So it's very a lot we have to learn from them. Yeah.
I mean, it's a big city with a lot of architects in it. They're all members of the New York chapter. So
Michael, if you don't mind, I would actually like to get started and then we'll do the recording and then maybe because people who watch this video after can still claim the learning unit. So that they will actually go on to and they will rewatch it after the meeting. So I think if you don't mind, let's get started.
I can't share my screen.
Okay, let me hang on. Hang on. Invite panelists. The panelists can allow to share. Interesting. Wait. Hey, that is very strange. I'm gonna make you. I'm gonna make you the host. So you could.
So much responsibility. Oh, there it goes. Great. I think that I have to show my whole desktop in order to do this properly. So welcome to my desktop. Please don't judge. Can you see this?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Vicky, and the chapter. It's really nice to join you. I'm kind of really excited to be sharing some projects and strategies and practice models for design forward civic engagement that we've been involved in the last bit of time. I guess this talk was an attempt to address a kind of intersection between design thinking and civics, and it's one that we are increasingly interested in seeking out, and one that I think holds an enormous amount of promise, both for the public good, but also for the discipline of architecture. So I'm sort of normally talking about the work of two organizations, my practice, MKCA, and Design Advocates, which is a group that was founded earlier this spring. And at MKCA, we've sort of built a practice that's organized around a commitment to craft and a love of science and a certain kind of playful sensibility. And we're extremely interested in blurring the disciplinary boundaries between architecture, product design, and interior design. And that's tended to find expression in projects like these that consider the potential of motion and transformation in multifunctional and often small spaces, residential and kind of commercial environments. And these are projects with a decidedly cinematic and playful quality, where we've invested in developing and refining hardware, and fabrication, mechanisms, motors, and construction where we're kind of very deliberately able to regulate motion and the choreography of both the moving elements of the architecture and the sort of interface between architecture and the body. And here in a single family house project on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, we're also kind of deeply invested in developing a through line between digital design methodologies and processes and artisan material processes, which in these examples include the forming and sculpting of ceramics, as in the case of the terracotta facade system that is on the left, metal fabrication, as in the case of the stair with a kind of braided bronze railing in the center, and robotic milling, as in the case of the carved and lacquered wood ceiling that's on the right. And our practice is sort of, many of our projects are deeply collaborative, and we sort of begin often from the standpoint of creating collaborative and kind of interdisciplinary teams. So one of those collaborations are kind of with artists. This is a work with the artist Sarah Oppenheimer, who works sort of at the intersection of architecture and site-specific artwork. And in that Upper East Side project, we also had an opportunity to develop a very special collaborative, a kind of collaborative exploration that emerged initially out of a client's request for a vertical garden. And vertical gardens are notoriously difficult and maintenance intensive, especially in environments like the Northeastern United States, where there are large swings in the climate between the summer and the winter. So we approached the design of this particular vertical garden through a kind of hyper-local lens. And so that started, as shown on the left, with a very detailed environmental analysis, where we measured and simulated a series of variables like humidity, temperature, solar exposure, and the like, and constructed a kind of ecological profile that was very unique to the facade. And with that profile in hand, we then went looking for a target ecosystem locally, and began to concentrate on the limestone cliff faces of the Hudson Valley, which are just immediately north of New York City, and really started to look at the plant species that are specifically native to that environment. And the facade and the roof and the gardens of the house begin to kind of track this ecosystem very precisely, from the forest floor to the cliff face to the cliff top. And interestingly enough, like that ecosystem that's there in the Hudson Valley are also home to a number of native species that are on the federal endangered species list, because they're by and large losing their habitat due to climate change. So the garden facade began to also become a sort of exploration into the efficacy or potential agency that an individual building, kind of like microscopic relative to the scale of the climate, could begin to have a meaningful impact on a planetary phenomenon like climate change and the loss of biodiversity. So we began to kind of concentrate on a particular species, which is shown here. It's called the American Hearthstone fern, which is one of these species that are on the federal endangered species list. And working in collaboration with landscape architects and conservation botanists at the State University of New York, we developed a strategy to propagate and plant the wall with these species. And actually had to seek out and obtain a warrant from the US Fish and Wildlife Service in order to kind of work with these ferns outside of their native environment. And we're able to propagate them through a commercial contract greenhouse, which meant that this species was suddenly commercially available for other conservation-minded garden projects. And so running parallel to that effort was also a design effort to put the form of the planter unit at stake and sort of looking at the three-dimensional texture of the facade itself, as well as the form of the planter unit and the shadows that it would cast below, which would kind of then in turn impact the sort of ecological profile. And the development of the facade's actual geometry then kind of took these factors into account to sort of coax out ecological intensities that compress and expand the sort of micro and like almost kind of microscopic environments of a limestone cliff and begin to kind of compress a very large ecosystem spanning a wide range of ecological intensities into a single 35-foot tall wall. And so then working with a manufacturer of terracotta facade systems, we developed a zero waste casting process that to create the planter units themselves, which were then coated with a glaze that had a kind of pH value that was neutral, like as with these kind of cliff faces. And so this is a view of the vertical garden that was shortly after its initial planting. It's full of these very beautiful ferns that are also kind of these poster children for climate change. And so there's a kind of blurry line in a lot of this work between environmental simulation and design, and that's one that we're very interested in. And we're also kind of exploring what that means on an urban scale. This is an image from 1981 of the broadcast antennas or broadcast entities that had antennas on the spire of the Empire State Building. And while that spire was sort of famously designed as a mooring mast for airships, the spire of the Empire State Building has actually been home to broadcast infrastructure from the very beginning. The Empire State Building was home to RCA and its experiments in kind of early television broadcast from the 1930s onward. And though this building was briefly superseded by the World Trade Center for about 25 years, since September 11th, 2001, the Empire State Building has once again been the primary broadcast point for the entire New York metropolitan region. And so what's interesting about that is that the infrastructural significance that has of the building has actually been historically one of the reasons why the Empire State Building enjoys primacy on the skyline of New York, because the clear line of sight is actually still the surest measure of signal quality. And it's also one of the reasons why New York in its most sort of iconographic form is literally an antenna. And so our Signal Space project is an investigation into this sort of historical relationship between the technologies of broadcast and urban form, which is a relationship that's being entirely reimagined and relitigated for as the primary technology for receiving multimedia information shifts from traditional broadcast to mobile. And there's a kind of corresponding change then in the expression of the infrastructure of information from the sort of singular iconic tower against the skyline to a more distributed network of antennas that are just sort of haphazardly incorporated into the noisy environments of local rooftops. And so while it's entirely and utterly essential, the mobile phone infrastructure is also entirely privately owned and largely secret. It's sort of hiding in plain sight. And it's also the subject of quite a lot of anxiety around issues of privacy, as well as kind of fears around radio frequency radiation and other concerns. And what renders that infrastructure visible has been sort of its rubbing up against other units of measure, like the lighting and height registrations that are required for the Federal Aviation Administration, or damage that some installations have done to existing buildings. There have even been protests in New York organized by tenants over landlords' efforts to kind of install mobile infrastructure on residential buildings. And there's also evidence of construction, which I'll come back to in a second. There is no publicly available record or map of what this critical infrastructure is or where it's located. And so we began to be a little obsessed with creating that record. As part of some of my academic activities, one of those efforts was a series of what we called antenna spotting events that were these walking tours of various neighborhoods, like Greenwich Village, where groups of designers could kind of scan rooftops and take note of all the antennas that could be identified visually, and then in turn mapped. And so this is a map of one of those sweeps, you know, kind of where we went over the course of a day. And then another part of that effort was also the sort of light hacking of an antenna tracking app for Android that we downloaded and installed on an Android phone that was able to log the antennas that a particular phone was connected to over the course of a series of sweeps that we made throughout Manhattan. And so this is sort of a walk around my own neighborhood in Lower Manhattan that sort of illustrates the locations of all of the different cell phone antennas that my phone was connected to over the course of an afternoon, and is a way, a kind of portrait of what the network sort of knew about me over the course of that particular day. And then, as I mentioned, there's also construction. So in 2011, New York City's Department of Buildings also kind of somewhat randomly created a very particular electrical permit category that was specific to work on cell phone antenna installations. And so we began to log those new maintenance and installation permits, and using some GIS software and also, you know, some other kind of computational, you know, wizardry, began to kind of cross-reference that data with other city planning and building department data. And ultimately, we were able to create a database of over 14,000 permit applications and installations that were worked on over the course of a couple of years. And so what is emerging from that effort, that sort of data scraping effort, is more of a kind of God's eye view of the infrastructure itself and how tightly fit it is to the form of the city. So this map inventories the location of the address of all of these special cell phone electrical permits against the height and age of the building, as well as the number of installations that are on each building. And you can begin to kind of read, you know, the three-dimensional form of New York in an image like this. And so we're also kind of very interested in what this relationship might mean for the future form of the city and its infrastructure, and like starting to think about, you know, paranoia around factors like exposure. And one of those interesting collaborations that's emerged from this research that kind of also sort of points to that more collaborative future is that in 2016, we were contacted by City Bike, which is the bike share system of New York City, about a partnership, because the bike share stations actually communicate with each other and sort of with their home base via mobile networks. So for the past 5 years, we've been engaged in a data sharing collaboration with City Bike, where we are providing insight and locations of the mobile phone installations that are then, and that kind of data, those fields of data have then been used by City Bike's team to make adjustments to the locations of the bike share system, and also to help them grow the system into new neighborhoods. So changing gears slightly, this is a project that we completed a couple of years ago. It's yet another different scale. It's a children's library in a shelter in the Bronx that serves women who have children under the age of 9 who are transitioning out of homelessness. And the library is located on a mezzanine level of a former chapel space in the shelter. And it's a space that's unique in the shelter in that it's specifically for reading and storytelling and exploration, and really it's a space of imagination. And it serves a population of children who historically have not had their own books. So the project is largely kind of a series of shelving elements and study tables and kind of lighting that are for reading and for homework, and also a very graphic carpet that somewhat abstractly indicates different functional zones. Like there's a sort of spot in the foreground that is a circular kind of zone for sitting in a circle and listening to a story. There are also a series of custom upholstered proofs that that come out for events, and when they're stashed in the cubbies along the wall, they produce a continuous upholstered surface that makes sort of curling up on the floor with a book a more comfortable experience for a child. And the geometry of the events themselves is sort of cuddly, which and they have integrated lighting to sort of brighten up the space that was quite dark before. And they have this scale that is both safe as a kind of balustrade to the double height space that is beyond. It's also intended to be very approachable for young children to kind of diminish the intimidation factor that the library might have in this kind of environment. And this is a project that we did on a pro bono basis, and it's really become one of the most instructive. I don't know. One of the most instructive and eye-opening aspects of the project was an effort that we engaged in to solicit in-kind donations. So in addition to sort of providing our services for free, we were trying to raise money to support the fabrication and the resourcing and the decoration of the project. And in this sense, there's a sort of expanded field of practice that began to emerge through a search for territories beyond the sort of the domain of the design proper, where we could have a degree of agency and make a contribution. And that became one of the most potent takeaways of the project. We sort of reached out to our network to kind of help to resource the project through construction and fabrication. We kind of built a network of friends who were other designers who contributed high-end design objects for our charity auction that we used to raise money to kind of endow a kind of maintenance regime in the library. And we helped to kind of solicit donations for books and also the purchase of books, and sort of worked with a primary donor and other donors. And so it somehow became a kind of a way to think about how, as architects, we might have a sort of broader terrain, of agency, and that experience, that takeaway, has really informed our subsequent pro bono work, as well as the formation of design advocates. So in late March of this year, the COVID crisis was beginning to unfold in a very serious way in New York. And I was really terrified for myself and everyone around me, but also for the businesses and the workers that we collaborate with. And so the origins of Design Advocates was actually a couple of Instagram stories that I had posted, looking for friends in the design community that we could talk to and engage, and sort of in an effort to somehow do something. And it was really clear to all of us that COVID-19 posed a series of problems that were somehow spatial, sort of uniquely spatial and architectural in nature, because it concerned interior environments and our ability to sort of be together and like not be together. And we began to think that somehow architects might be somehow uniquely qualified to be helpful to think about so the impact of the pandemic. So there was what kind of emerged from this was a very small group of friends that became a slightly larger group of friends. And initially we kind of started a weekly conference call for small firm principals, initially to just kind of talk amongst ourselves about how we were each adapting our practices to the crisis. And and really feeling like it was important for small firms to not be left out of the conversation, to have a seat at the table, to kind of thinking about how to restore small businesses, and also thinking about what the city was going to do in response to the crisis. And we began to sort of think about how to also share resources and know-how amongst ourselves, and then in turn how to share that expertise with our community. And so that really grew into a program that we call Test Fits, where there are teams of offices and volunteers who are working collaboratively on a series of pro bono projects that are intended to serve disadvantaged communities and also the public good. And in the United States, as the crisis was unfolding, amid a kind of utter absence of a coordinated federal response and plan, and also quite a lot of conflicting and really limited guidance from the state and city of New York, as these maps show, it was also disproportionately and somewhat horrifyingly impacting low-income communities and communities of color. So these two maps, one being kind of income level and the other being COVID-19 cases, are basically the same map. And so, of course, like as the crisis was beginning to really roar out of control here, it also coincided with a kind of nationwide or global reckoning over racial injustice and police violence against communities of color. And so that's the sort of background context where design advocates and the sort of twin design advocates sort of emerged, and the kind of twin issues that we felt compelled to engage in a productive way. And so one of those first efforts that we engaged in was really with just local restaurants, sort of in our own neighborhoods, like kind of looking around, just thinking about who we could help in a simple way. And restaurants at that time had been closed, all restaurants in New York City. And shortly after we started Design Advocates, the city of New York rolled out a program called Open Restaurants that would enable restaurants to open onto the public way, onto the sidewalk and into the parking lane of the roadbed. And very quickly, we became very interested in that program, and very quickly learned that we needed to develop strategies for outreach and constituency building to restaurant owners, particularly those who might not have previously had experience working with or might not have had access to working with design professionals. So we created this is one of the things that we did. We kind of created a pamphlet that could be distributed to restaurants that described a suite of services that we could offer for free to help them to open outdoors. And this is Kopi Tiam. It's a Malaysian restaurant that's located between Chinatown and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's one of our kind of very first restaurant projects, really one of the very first Design Advocates projects, which is really just kind of like a quick project that was comprised of a raised plywood platform and a series of tables and chairs that could be nested together at night, and a protective barrier around the perimeter, kind of like to kind of keep it safe within the roadbed. That is also a counter that is subdivided by a series of planters to kind of delimit the number of people who can cluster at any one area. And then a sort of lightweight canopy. And all of it's sort of designed to in a way channel some of the informal roadside structures of Southeast Asia. And it's painted in these very vibrant and happy colors that make the installation highly visible, both for attracting customers and also to improve improve safety in the roadway. And so this idea of the very quickly and inexpensive erected informal structure is one of the things that we've embraced in many of the early projects. This is another, which is a furniture system for the Bowery Residence Committee, which is a nonprofit agency that provides services to the homeless population in New York City. It's one of the largest providers of services to the homeless in New York City. And the BRC had asked us to create a system to create that would make safe and kind of empowering individual spaces for their clients to live in their transitional shelters, which are traditionally an open room with a low partition and just a bed with a kind of like a little storage locker off to the side. So we're kind of using the language of that, but just thinking about a couple of additional elements, you know, a sort of taller, transparent screening, you know, for sort of improved safety, a 6 foot or kind of 2 meter spacing between modules, and this little dot on the floor that begins to demarcate a zone of personal space that we felt was kind of lending a greater degree of kind of humanity and dignity to the experience of being in a shelter where people might be living for many months amid, you know, kind of collective housing sort of arrangement. And, you know, as with CoPTM, we're thinking about sort of color and graphic expression through these cleanable fiberglass panels that snap and prefabricated locker units that snap into a scaffolding kind of framework. And the idea here is for the system to be dimensionally adaptable and kind of formally adaptable, and also that it's a system that can be erected quickly and also maintained by some of the homeless clients who are also engaged in the BRC's on-site job training, where they're kind of training clients to work in construction and in building maintenance. So the advocates part of Design Advocates also means that we're engaging in this work with public agencies like the New York City Department of Education. So we recently developed reopening plans for 4 New York City public schools. This is one such plan that looks at how individual classrooms can be allocated to students who are participating in the school's what's called mixed learning kind of combination, where students are on site at the school on certain days of the week, and then they're also doing remote learning on other days of the week. And it's a way of beginning to rotate the population of schools through the school building, while also kind of keeping the population low, you know, kind of like maintaining the kind of like in-person learning experience. This is a project for PS34 in Brooklyn, which is actually the oldest public school building in Brooklyn. And you can see it's a building with no corridors. All of the classrooms are accessed sort of enfilade or railroad style from adjacent rooms. And so in this project, the challenge really became a strategy for sort of color coding the rooms against a schedule, and then thinking about a series of circulatory routes using every staircase and sort of basement corridor in the building to allow for 2 classrooms to be able, you know, separate classrooms to be able to be entered without having to kind of enter through another classroom on the days when those rooms were occupied. There's a little kind of spatial puzzle that needed to be solved, and a sort of arrival and circulatory protocol for students and teachers and staff. And then there's a sort of very simple socially distanced playground and seating plan. And ultimately, the kind of physical expression of this plan is a pamphlet that you're seeing kind of excerpts of here, as well as a series of just sort of like very simple environmental graphics that were printed on vinyl and kind of stuck to surfaces in the school. And I will say that one of the most kind of gratifying experiences of Design Advocates so far is that shortly after this plan was implemented, we began to receive, you know, emails and text messages from parents and teachers telling us things like that telling us that you know, I had been really, you know, terrified of going back to school, but I sort of, now that we have a plan, like I'm okay, like we can do this. And so that's been sort of an incredibly rewarding proof of concept that this sort of spatial wrangling that I think that we're all very familiar with as design professionals is sort of can be enormously helpful to our communities. And so, you know, that's kind of part of a larger series of signage that we've been developing within Design Advocates, kind of that's made open source to be downloaded or kind of printed at will, kind of made available to local businesses and nonprofits. And then this is sort of like one more kind of partnership or kind of research effort where we are So the research end of our advocacy, this is a map of prospective street closures in the Elmhurst section of Queens, where we're looking at a host of variables that might contribute to or might inform which stretches of streets would optimally be closed to vehicular traffic, and how those closures could begin to benefit other kinds of urban program like outdoor learning environments, or kind of cooling relief in the summertime, or outdoor restaurant dining. And so looking closer at this is one of those segments, and this is a kind of a collaboration. This is a sort of independent research project that we began to kind of explore, and it has resulted in a collaboration with both the local community board as well as the local business improvement district, kind of looking very deliberately at these individual blocks that could be proposed for street closures to the New York City Department of Transportation, and kind of thinking about which of the sort of neighborhood functions could really benefit from those street closures. So that's one effort of several, or a couple of efforts of several that we've begun, where we're partnering with public agencies like the Department of Transportation, and in this case with the Economic Development Corporation of the City of New York. And so one of these efforts is this program that we helped to create that's called the Design Corps, which is in some ways design advocates in miniature. It's a collaboration between design advocates, the EDC, which is the Economic Development Corporation, and also the AIA New York chapter, to create a database of architects who are willing to offer their services pro bono to local restaurants, and to kind of help them to create these outdoor dining installations. And so we've kind of helped to stand up that program, which is now a couple of months old, by creating training materials for the architects, as well as a series of informational webinars for prospective clients, who once again are frequently ones who've not really had the benefit of working with design professionals in the past, as well as a suite of resources for both parties. So that's a kind of ongoing effort, and as the shape of restaurant reopening begins to kind of change and include considerations of what happens in the wintertime, and also the sort of limited indoor dining that is beginning to be permitted in New York, we're kind of adapting the system in real time as the program in real time as events unfold. And that sort of collaborative spirit then is also beginning is beginning to kind of like frame these expanded practice models that we're testing, in an effort to sort of greatly expand the collaborative potential of design advocates projects. So this is one more restaurant installation, a more recent one, that's in the Kingsbridge neighborhood of the Bronx, which was for New York City, like known as the epicenter of the pandemic, kind of vastly and disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And so it's a restaurant installation for a Dominican restaurant called Chapacal. And our design team created and also resourced the construction of these barriers that you see on the left, that are made of plywood, and they satisfy the city's requirement for roadside installations. But in this case, like that set of elements is not an end unto itself. It's really just an infrastructural substrate for other materials. And in this case, we've collaborated with these gentlemen on the right, Felix and Dexter Cyprion, who are brothers and also artists who grew up in this neighborhood. And so Felix and Dexter are collage artists, and they've developed this sort of collage process with us to incorporate culturally specific elements and also imagery that are kind of comprised of local history and also ingredients like rice that are important to many of the cultures, Asian, Latin American, Caribbean, and African, that are kind of at home in this neighborhood. And so like trying to find ways to create a kind of imagery to help to build community through thinking about food. And so Felix and Dexter took our basic elements and they began to kind of create a kind of a site and culturally specific installation that incorporates plastic scraps and foraged shutters and other materials and this bright orange paint that begins to create a kind of a vibe or a mood that's reminiscent of the Dominican Republic. And so these are some views of the opening of the installation last month. And so last, we've begun to be extremely interested in the potential of these kind of collaborative practices and constituency building and community engagement and participatory design as ways for these projects to be deeply rooted in the communities where they occur and where they're intended to be of service. And also, I think, interestingly, to kind of fold those processes back to begin to explore what we think is a very compellingly expanded mode of architectural practice. So this is a final project. It's called Summertime, which is a brand new gallery in Brooklyn that represents artists who have intellectual disabilities, and kind of promotes neurodiversity. And so these are some images of. I'm not even going to show you the design schemes. These are images of an event that we staged a few weeks ago that we called the Participatory Pinup, where many of the design schemes for the gallery, as well as the elements that have been designed, were sort of pinned up and taped out on the walls and floor of the gallery. And we kind of over the course of 4 days organized an event with the gallery owners who are here and the artists who are represented by the gallery to kind of for the artists to come in like very small socially distanced shifts over the course of several days. And leave their imprint and their comments and their red lines and their kind of input on our design work. So what's happening now is that the kind of process has been opened up to this community to not just solicit their feedback, but to kind of solicit their design thinking and really kind of like their expertise about their own work. And this is a gallery that is simultaneously a kind of space for exhibition and also a place for artists to sort of produce artwork. So it needs to sort of perform these dual functions. So and I think what has really begun to kind of emerge out of that is a process where there are new fields of information that are available to the design effort. Kind of like so this is the sort of taped out version of one of the schemes, and the kind of resulting material that has now then been inventoried and photographed and sort of documented and will be folded into our design processes. And so we've just hit the 6-month mark of design advocates, about roughly, of this program, and really what we've been working on upon reflection, what we've been working on in this project and also the work of the studio is really an effort that is grounded in a belief that kind of a belief in the exceptional capacity of this generation of architects and of independent design practices and of collaboration, and an effort to explore the potentials of this greatly expanded and collaborative mode of practice. And I think that I think there are lessons to learn here for how to dismantle the notion that somehow one's practice and the pursuit of design excellence on the one hand, and one's ethics and sort of service to one's community are somehow separate concerns that don't really belong together. And I think that we're finding that the sort of ethical concerns or the desire to be of service is starting to produce sort of primary design information that we think is part and parcel of the kind of primary design agendas that are driving these projects. And I'm really hoping that these efforts are starting to comprise a model that begins to point to a future for the practice where those touchstones and values are beginning to kind of move much closer together. So this is just these are the offices that comprise the leadership of design advocates, and then a few of the images of some of the practices and individuals who've been contributing to this effort over the course of the last 6 months. And that's it.
Oh, thank you, Michael. This is so inspirational for the amount of work that your whole design advocates is able to achieve in only 6 months. This is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, this effort is now, it started with 5 offices. We're now a little north of 120 offices and individual volunteers. And, you know, there are probably, I don't know, maybe a little over 50 projects that are kind of happening simultaneously. You know, it's been a sort of like a, what have you got, we'll do it kind of, you know, kind of an effort. But I have to say it's one of the most rewarding and sort of fun things that any of us have been working on over the last many months. And so it's just been incredibly inspiring and sustaining to work with this community of designers.
Cool. I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions, and I'm gonna open it up to the audience as well. The first question is like, how do you mobilize and motivate people to join you so that they could? I guess all of them work for free, right? How do you mobilize them, and you know, so that they can work with you to help people?
Well, I mean, you know, to be honest, like we really haven't done much outreach. It's sort of, you know, the growth of our membership, such as it is, has really happened quite organically. I think the people have, by and large, reached out to us. We have a web presence. There's a kind of an onboarding. I wouldn't call it an application. There's a form that you can fill out indicating your interest. We've found that we have more volunteers than we have projects actually too. So that aspect has not been that difficult, really. And I think that the notion of service is really quite deeply rooted in our discipline, and I think that people have been looking for a channel to be able to make a meaningful contribution.
Wow.
And I think that the particulars of the pandemic are in many ways kind of like oddly very well suited, or kind of architects are very well suited to be of use. I think, you know, one of the other things that we've really tried to think about is how Design Advocates is also a platform to kind of promote the potential of smaller and independent design practices. And so, you know, the recognition that we received recently from the New York chapters was kind of one of these cornerstone events that we could really begin to share with our membership. So I think, you know, we're looking also for other ways to amplify the voices and profiles of the people that have been working on this project. You know, it's very much it's a deeply collaborative and kind of community driven effort. So I think it's just been, and also it's fun, you know, and so like I think that that's just been it. Like it's this, like all of the Design Advocates projects are collaborative, and so you know, meaning that you know, it's at least a couple, and sometimes it's 4 or 6 offices that are working together. And sometimes they're multidisciplinary teams with like engineers and like lighting designers and landscape designers. And so it's also the ask is while people are working for free, the ask is not that much, right? So the idea was always that this collaborative effort was a way for even small offices or individuals to put a few hours a week into this kind of effort, but have a sort of incredibly kind of outsized impact at the back end. And so like, I think that that's something that's beginning to be borne out as these projects begin to move through implementation and completion.
Cool. The next question is related to the first one. Is like, you have been working with, Design Advocates has been working with a lot of government agency. Do you face like, even if you offer design, sometimes they don't have to listen, right? So it gets into a whole political like debate. But how do you like? So how does it work? Like, how do you engage them so that they're willing to work with you? Because they may not have a need, but you wanted to change something that they don't work well.
I think that it cannot be, you know, the unique situation of COVID-19 is is a big reason for that. You know, I think it cannot be overstated just how under-resourced our public agencies are in this city and in this country. And so I think one of the things that we found very early, and we found at the beginning of this project, that there was a lot of trepidation around, you know, like nobody wanted to really step in to kind of fill the gap between general guidance. You know, the CDC recommends the following. No one really wanted to be the person to kind of connect the dots for individual, let's say, restaurant owners. And so I think that it was our willingness to just be like, well, we're architects, like we do this all the time. Like we connect those dots all the time. This is what we do for a living. And so the willingness to kind of step into the fray at that moment and sort of say like, look, we don't have all of the answers, but we can at least help an individual restaurant to cross-reference a few different sort of seemingly contradictory bits of guidance, you know, and a few regulations, and help get them open, meant that we had a kind of instantaneous audience of clients. And once we had done a few, you know, I mean, we had done maybe like, we worked on maybe like, you know, 15 restaurant projects or something like that in the first few months. We found that the city agencies came to us because suddenly every time I was on a Zoom call, it was like, oh, you're from Design Advocates. Like, well, you guys are the experts on this, right? And it's sort of like, well, we've been working on this for 2 months. Like, we don't know. We know a little bit. And so I think that it was just the willingness to kind of to lean in that created the opportunity to have the ear of public agencies, which, you know, to be honest, like or under ordinary circumstances, really don't have the time or the patience for smaller practices to have a voice. And so like that was something that we were very, very focused on initially, kind of, and we felt that the pro bono kind of dimension was a way to, in a way, kind of wedge the door open to have a more substantive conversation.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm actually, I'm sure we have more questions from the audience. Peter, Matthew, Ben, and with another person, Geneva. So feel free to, I've unmuted all of you, so feel free to ask the questions.
Well, I have a question, Vicky and Michael. I mean, I think it's very admirable, all of this work that you're doing, and as you say, it's pro bono, but presumably you are supporting your firm with fee-paying work. Otherwise, there's fee-paying work that you know, pays the rent and salaries and so on. But have you ever, or it's only been going for 6 months, I guess, but has there been any have there been any problems with you know, responsibility, litigation, PI, you know, all of that? Because New York and America in general is known to be the most litigious place on the planet. And
Right.
I'm just thinking that, you know, in this situation, helping people with, you know, how to open a restaurant or reopen a restaurant, and giving advice, and then, you know, do your clients, these pro bono clients, do they need to sign a waiver, or has anything come up like that?
Yeah, so we've been benefiting from the counsel of one of the very, very large and kind of prominent law firms in New York City called O'Melveny, and that their pro bono practice, we were connected to their pro bono practice. They've been doing exactly that. So we have agreements with clients that describe the scope of services, and also, you know, kind of try to make explicit the nature of the advice that we're able to give, and what the kind of limits of the information that are you know, kind of contained in that advice. in by and large, we're also kind of paying attention to, to sort of guide other forms of guidance, and these kinds of partnerships that we're engaged in with, for example, public agencies has also been really helpful in that respect.
Right. Okay, good. Well, it sounds like you've got all the bases covered. I hear horror stories of, friends who have firms in the U.S., New York in particular, where, something happens, 8 years after the project is done, or, one of the partners is retiring and then something happens and they get a call, and, you're carrying the responsibility, the liability, for the rest of your life. It's just, it seems. And I think it must be something that you would definitely need to watch out for. And good for O'Melveny, for doing that. So it's just kind of a joint effort of professionals getting together and providing design advice and services, and as well as legal advice for the designer, hand in hand. Very important.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we've, the experience here has also been very interesting, because the organization is comprised largely of firm principals. I think that we're all, as a firm principal in New York, like I'm very attuned to issues of around liability and sort of the limits of professionally what we're able to do and what we're not able to do, and where we should tread and where we should not tread. Like, it's something that is very familiar and well rehearsed for all of us. But I think the addition of these kind of partnerships with law firms, but also with public agencies, has meant that, for example, in the restaurant kind of installations, the kind of permit that has been created for these outdoor installations is also a self-certified, an owner self-certified permit. It's and that's kind of emerged in the city as a result of kind of an effort to put some ownership of sort of the safety measures on the parts of the business owners who are opening, right? So like there are also some structural mechanisms that have been put into place to kind of help in this regard, but we are definitely also having conversations around,
Sure.
Around with AIA and other kinds of organizations to try to protect the design professionals who are willing to step into this kind of situation.
Great.
What are the average age of the design advocates and all the volunteers?
It ranges. We have some volunteers who are recent graduates, like a few, but by and large, we've been trying to keep the membership to firms, in part so that we don't have to, as a board, we don't have to manage every project. It's sort of a wonderful thing to work with people who run their own offices. Like, they all know how to run a project. They all know how to kind of keep organized and sort of hit their marks. And so I'd say like the age range is probably it tracks very closely to those of us who are running kind of firms under 10 people. So it's people in their sort of early to mid 30s, to their kind of like mid 40s, maybe a little bit, maybe a bit older. We do have some advisors, firms like Thornton Tomasetti, who are obviously global, and have a wider range of ages in terms of their principles. But yeah, I'd say that we're kind of like an early middle-aged population.
This is, I mean, it's going to sound a little political, but it has been very true, at least here in Hong Kong. You probably have seen in the news that since 2019, we have a lot of civic protests here in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. So we noticed that young people are very vocal about what they wanted. Not only vocal, but they could turn very, they can become very active. But
Right.
only on very, very, very specific subjects. Once we actually, AIA, when we actually ask for volunteers to do this like communal activities, many of them don't end up showing up. So we were all surprised. It's like when we have young designers and young architects who are so vocal on one of a few things, but when we ask them to show up and to volunteers for other things, they all disappear. So that's why I was wondering how you get to, grow to like 150 firms in like 6 months. That really surprised me. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I think it's sort of miraculous to me as well. Like I don't know how it happened. It was not it was not planned this way. I'm we're very, very grateful to have this community of people who are participating. And I think there's just been a lot of there's people seem to be really hungry for an outlet for service. So it hasn't been our experience. I think that I think the kind of corollary, is that there is I don't know, I'm just thinking about our own political environment here, like there's an election unfolding right now, and it was sort of one of those very interesting things that that traditionally the people who volunteer at the polls or who work at the polls, tend to be older Americans, and in-person voting is not necessarily the safest thing. So there's been a kind of a nationwide call for younger poll workers to kind of, it's not fun. It's a 12-hour shift. You might get paid $200 for it. It's like it's all day. There's training. There's a lot, and to be sure, there are many places where there are not enough poll workers, but there are also other places that have a kind of excess now of people, mostly young people who have lower risk to the coronavirus, stepping forward to kind of fill in the gaps. And so I think that there is an enormous amount of kind of community spirit in the younger generation. I think that it is maybe not as evenly distributed as we would like, but it's definitely been my observation that there's a lot of desire to get involved.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Michael. Do we have more questions from the audience? If not, well, thank you again, Michael. We will be sending a thank you note from AIA Hong Kong, and we'll be posting this, with your approval, we'll be posting this video online. We hope your story and the story of design advocates will get more people excited about proponent work and actually using our expertise and professional knowledge to help the community.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Vicky.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.